The older I get, the more I enjoy the quiet things in life. Mornings on my porch, a good cup of black coffee, and a bit of target practice out on the back of my property. I live on a large, open ranch at the edge of town. It's been in my family for generations, and I've maintained the land with pride. I'm no threat to anyone. My neighbors have always respected me, and I've always returned that same respect. That was until she moved in. They called her Karen even before I met her. Newly divorced, loud as a train horn, and allergic to minding her own business. She bought the place right down the road, well outside the HOA line, but that didn't stop her from acting like she ran the neighborhood. From day one, she came at me sideways. First, it was my wind chimes, too noisy, then it was my pickup, too dusty, and finally, my backyard shooting range. Now before you get the wrong idea, let me make something clear. I don't run a public gun range. I have a private setup behind a reinforced barn where I do some casual shooting. It's fully legal, registered, and maintained by the book. I use it maybe twice a week, mostly for old-school bolt-action practice. I've been hunting since I was 12 and teaching proper firearm safety since I was 30. In fact, I used to train the sheriff's department years ago before I retired, but Karen didn't care about any of that. It all started one Saturday afternoon. The weather was clear, the sun was high, and I decided to get in a little target shooting before sunset. I'd just lined up my scope on a paper target when I heard the screech. "Hey, you can't do that!" I lowered my rifle, stood up, and turned around to see her stomping through the fence line like she owned the place, phone in hand, face twisted with fake outrage. I calmly leaned my rifle against the table, raised my hands, and said, "Ma'am, you're trespassing. This is private property." She was already recording. "Don't you ma'am me. You're shooting guns within a residential zone. I'm reporting this." I laughed a little, not because it was funny, but because it was absurd. My ranch is properly zoned for agricultural and recreational use, and my shooting setup was grandfathered in long before she showed up with her attitude. "You can report it all you like," I said. "Everything here is legal, and I've got the paperwork to prove it." That's when she made the first threat. "We'll see what the sheriff has to say when they get here. I have connections." I raised an eyebrow. "You don't say." She stormed off, muttering about lunatics with rifles and taking this to court. Now I don't rattle easily, but I admit I was a little annoyed. Not worried, mind you, but irritated that someone who barely knew me thought she could spin some tale and shut down something that had existed long before her short-term mortgage ever showed up. Sure enough, the next day, I got a call from a deputy. "Mr. Hank Mitchell? Speaking. We received a report of unsafe firearm activity at your address. We're obligated to check it out." I chuckled. "Of course you are. Feel free to swing by. I'll have coffee ready." An hour later, 2 sheriff's vehicles rolled up. Out stepped Deputy Jameson and Sergeant Ruiz, 2 men I knew well. "Dang, Hank," Jameson said, grinning. "We told you that one day you'd outshoot us so bad someone'd call the law on you." "Guess that day's today," I said, opening the barn. I walked them through everything. Safety measures, the berm, the backstop, the range layout. They knew it already, of course. Heck, I helped design the sheriff's own range back in 2002. Still, they took pictures, made their notes, and went through the motions, professional, as always. "She said you were pointing rifles toward her house," Ruiz said. I pointed in the exact opposite direction. Unless her house grew legs and jumped 3 hills over, I'd say she's full of it. They laughed but stayed respectful. "Don't worry," Jameson said. "We'll file it as a routine check. No violations, but fair warning, she seems determined." I nodded. "Let her be. She'll dig her own hole if she keeps pushing." I wasn't wrong. Over the next week, Karen started a smear campaign. She knocked on neighbors' doors, warning them about the armed old man down the road. She made Facebook posts in the local groups, full of dramatic lies and blurry photos from 300 feet away. Then she crossed the line. She filed an official complaint with the county zoning board, claiming I was operating an unlicensed commercial gun range. That triggered a formal investigation, and a temporary suspension of range use until the matter was reviewed. I was mad, but not surprised. I gathered every document I had: permits, zoning maps, safety certifications, sheriff's letters of support. I even had photos from the county inspection 5 years ago when they gave me an award for rural safety standards. I wasn't just defending my range, I was defending my name. But here's where things got interesting. The hearing was public, which meant I could invite witnesses. And I did. 24 of them. The day of the hearing, I walked into the county building in my best denim shirt and boots, carrying a folder an inch thick. Karen was already there, dressed like she was heading to court on a soap opera. She saw me and rolled her eyes, whispering to the board clerk. Behind me, a crowd of familiar faces started filing in: neighbors, veterans, retired deputies, and even Sheriff Nolan himself. When Karen realized who they were, her face changed. Her confidence turned into confusion, then panic. The chairman called us forward. Karen launched into her monologue, how she feared for her life, how the daily gunfire was terrorizing her dog, how I ran a dangerous compound. She showed them a printed Facebook post and a couple of poorly zoomed-in photos. When it was my turn, I said nothing for the first 5 seconds, just looked around at the people who came to support me. Then I started. My name is Hank Mitchell. I'm a retired Marine, a certified firearms safety instructor, and a long-standing member of this community. I've trained over 300 individuals, including members of this very county's sheriff unit. My rifle range is private, legal, and maintained at a standard higher than most public facilities. I'm not the problem here. I'm just the latest target of someone who doesn't know how to mind her business. Then I stepped back. The chairman asked if anyone else wanted to speak. The sheriff stood up, and what he said changed everything. Sheriff Nolan stood up slowly, adjusted his belt, and looked right at the board. I've known Hank Mitchell for over 30 years, he said, voice steady but firm. He was the man who trained me on my first day with the department. He's instructed nearly every deputy we've had over the last 2 decades, including those still serving. His range is not just legal, it's safer than most of our own training grounds. Karen's mouth opened slightly like she wanted to speak, but nothing came out. The sheriff continued. If we had more folks like Hank, this county would be safer. The only disturbance I've seen comes from false complaints and wasted department time. That line hit hard. Several people in the room nodded. One man even clapped softly before stopping himself. The chairman looked at Karen and said, Ma'am, do you have any evidence of wrongdoing beyond personal discomfort? Karen shuffled through her papers like a magician whose trick had just failed. I saw him shooting. It was loud. I couldn't sleep. A woman from the neighborhood stood up next. She was soft-spoken, but her words cut through the silence. Ma'am, with all due respect, that man saved my family from a home intruder 5 years ago. He stayed with my son, gun unloaded but ready, until officers arrived. Don't talk to us about safety like we don't know what it means. That was it. The board ruled in my favor. Unanimously. Complaint dismissed. Permit reaffirmed. Karen warned for filing a false report. She stormed out of that room like she was the victim. Me? I stayed behind, shook hands, and thanked every neighbor who showed up. But this wasn't about a win. It was about drawing a line. A few days later, I was back on my range, target sheet flapping in the wind. The sun was setting, golden rays lighting up the hills. I took a shot, clean center, the kind of shot that doesn't just hit the mark, but feels like justice. I was packing up when I saw something at the edge of the property. It was Karen, but not yelling this time. She was standing still, just outside the fence, phone down, no clipboard in sight. She looked like a balloon that had finally lost all its air. I didn't wave. I didn't speak. I simply locked my barn and walked back to the porch, where my granddaughter was waiting with a glass of iced tea. Was that the lady who got mad? She asked. Yep, I said, sitting beside her. Why's she not yelling now? I looked out at the field and smiled. Sometimes people yell when they think nobody will push back. But once you stand your ground, they remember who they're yelling at. Weeks passed. Karen didn't bother me again, though she did try one last petty move, complaining to the mail carrier that my mailbox was leaning. The mailman just laughed and handed me the letter in front of her. The best part? That letter was an invitation. The sheriff's department wanted me to host a firearms safety workshop for local youth. "You're still the best we've got," the note read. That's when it hit me. She didn't just fail to shut me down. She accidentally reminded the town how much I meant to it. On the day of the workshop, 20 teenagers and their families showed up at my ranch. I gave them the safety talk, taught them respect for the weapon, discipline, precision, patience. Everything Karen never had. Near the end, one of the kids raised their hand. "Mr. Mitchell, have you ever had to use a rifle in real life?" I smiled gently. "I've held one in war, and I've held one in peace, but I've learned that the strongest part of any man is the one that chooses when not to pull the trigger." That night, the sun went down behind the hills. I stood by the barn and looked at the range, clean, safe, peaceful. And I thought about all the Karens in the world. They scream, they accuse, they twist facts, but they can't change who you are. If you stand firm, if your name means something, if your hands are clean, you win in the end.